I think we're gonna improvise from the beginning, but good afternoon, dear distinguished guests. I'm grateful for your attention. Please be seated, and our presentations are about to begin. It's my pleasure to be moderator of this symposium, although I don't have any experience about any moderation, but I'm grateful to be moderator of this symposium. I'm Batuhan Akkaya. As former Fulbright fellow, I want to extend my warm welcome to everyone here. To begin with the program, I just wanted to give some quick introduction about our program flow. Actually, this panel's idea initiated from a research from MIT Architectural Department, and we started to think about making a case study and site research about watershed urbanism, designing and planning for resilience in Istanbul's Ayamama corridor. So in this panel, we are gonna discuss about flood risks and mitigation initiatives in Istanbul. Then we're gonna continue river restoration in the Ayamama corridor practices. Later, we're going to talk about planning and designing and how can we create these resilient waterways. And lastly, we're going to discuss about how can we take an action about resilient waterways. To begin this program, we are very pleased to have Professor Rafi Segal, and I want to introduce him and let him to speak about what the Watershed Urbanism Symposium is about. Yes, Rafi Segal is an architect and associate professor at MIT, where he directs the Master of Architectural Urbanism program. Prior to MIT, he taught architecture and urban design at Harvard University, Regeneration School of Design, Columbia University, and Cooper Union School of Architecture. Among others, Segal's work involves design and research on the architectural, urban and regional scale. Currently, he focused on how emerging notions of collectivity can impact the design of buildings and cities. His current ongoing work, includes designs for new communal neighborhoods in Israel, Boston, Rwanda, and Philippines. Segal directs Future Urban Collectives, a new design research lab at MIT that explores the relationship between digital platforms and physical communities. Asking how architecture and urbanism can support and scale cohabitation, co-production, and coexistence, Segal has exhibited his work at venues including Storefront for Art and Architecture, Kunstwerk, Berlin, Wittevit, Rotterdam, Venice Biennale of Architecture, Museum of Modern Art, the Hong Kong Chance Urbanism Vienna. He holds a PhD from Princeton University and a master's and bachelor from Technion Israel Institute of Technology. So today, first of all, Professor Rafi Segal introduced LSAU to begin our program. So thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Batu, for our hosts here in TAC. And the event is live streamed across the world and at MIT. And whoever woke up in the US can open their Facebook and join us. I will give a very, very quick introduction to what brought us here. And frame, in a way, this interest in watershed urbanism and the restorations of our rivers. Rivers that so many of our cities were created around, but are also forgetting at the same time. And we had a fantastic morning today that we discovered this backside of the city, you can say, unknown part, which is very much alive, and there is water, and there is space, and there is so much potential. So the idea of looking at waterways in the urban context is so relevant for Istanbul, a city that is growing and has a demand for open space, but then is so relevant for so many other cities around the world. This project initiated through what we call the Leventhal Center for Advanced Urbanism at MIT, which is a center that brings together different professors, different research interests, different disciplines at MIT around issues of urbanism. We organize research, then we do exhibitions, lectures, symposiums, and disseminate that further. Every few years, we have a theme around which we work. The theme for these 3 years, this triennale, is equitable resilience. And to explain that, the idea of the concept not only is to work toward resiliency, but also to work towards that in an equitable way, to make sure that that low income or those who are in less fortunate economic positions don't get left behind, in a way to keep an equal, a more just approach to urban development. And the various ways in which the center works. In our first year, we had co-design sessions. You can see we did some publications, we did symposiums with other collaborations. We work across multiple sites around the world. And this specific work is part of a larger sponsorship of the DOR Group, which we have a representation here. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And we are one of the 4 grants, which this project started from runways to runoffs, we called it. Runways being the runway of an airport, which is decommissioned, and runoff is of water. But you can see there are other issues relating to heat, related to structure, related to missing data that the center is involved in. And before we begin, just to kind of share with you very fresh images from this morning of this enormous space of opportunity, but at the same time, an enormous space, as you know better, of risk and danger as well. So here, under the sun, it looks quiet and calm, but as we know, and some of you, of course, remember, if we do not deal with it, it can be an enormous danger. But with that danger, there's so much potential. So I leave it back to you to introduce our guests and our panelists. Thank you.
Now, I would like to give my deepest gratitude for Mayor of Kadıköy, Mr. Şerdar Odabaşı, for arranging this venue to us, and I'm also very grateful for Mr. Can Rukan Akbal, Director of Strategy Development, that's helping us on the background, even nobody knows about anything. And I'm grateful for Batu Seçilmiş for arranging all these technical things about this venue. So, thank you. Mr. Mayor, Charlie, we want to say a few words to us. Bize bir şey, herhangi bir şey, çok teşekkür ederiz sizlere tekrar bizi ağırladığınız için. So, to begin our presentations, we are pleased to have Mr. Untitled Chapter. Let me introduce him. He was born in 1965 in Edirne. After completing his high school education at Ankara Science High School, he received his bachelor degree in 2008 and his master's degree in 2011 from Watershed University, Civil Engineering Department. After working as a research assistant at the same institution between 2008 and 2011, he started to work at the General Directorate of ISKİ. In same institution there he took part in various studies on infrastructure projects, stream rehabilitation, flood modeling and climate change. He is currently working as a control engineer in charge of streams and stormwater lines in ISKİ, Istanbul Potable Water and Sewage Master Plan preparation. He is also a PhD student at Yıldız Technical University, Department of Hydraulics. So, welcome, Mr. Lanchak.
Herkese merhabalar. Hello everyone. First I want to thank you for this good organization and for welcoming us and meeting all these excellent people. Here I want to make a presentation about flood management in Istanbul, but it's a very wide topic, so I want to make a general summary for this management and how Istanbul changed up to now and how it will change from now. First, I want to mention about the population of Istanbul. As you see in the graphs, in Turkey, in the last 70 years or 50 years, the rural population is decreasing and the urban population is increasing. And after 1980, we have more urban population than rural. This results in more crowded cities, and we see also in Istanbul. Here we see that the population of Istanbul has increased rapidly in the last years. Also, in our master plan studies, we try to foresee how the population of Istanbul will change. In 30 years, the population of Istanbul is expected to reach 21 million, according to our master plan. So, we should make our plans by considering this population change. Sure, this increasing population can also be seen through the land use change in Istanbul. As you see from the image, we see loss of forests, watersheds, and creeks. Along with global climate change, there is also serious local issues in Istanbul that contribute to change in city climate as a result of urbanization and forest destruction. One post-grad study is the one published by Toros and et al. Due to this study, there has been a rise about nearly 1 Celsius in the daily average temperatures since the beginning of last century for Istanbul. Also, the daily maximum temperature seriously tend to increase about 1.5 Celsius, more than 1.5 Celsius. Minimum temperatures are also increasing. Analysis of number of days with daily maximum temperature higher than 30 Celsius is also increasing. Along with temperature changes, daily precipitation of Istanbul is also changing. As a result, we observe that some same amount of precipitation is received, but the precipitation occurs in less time. So the intensity of precipitation is increasing in Istanbul. Has increased in Istanbul and is going on. Annual average temperature and extension of warm periods in the year is increasing, and this differentiation of temperature can lead to aggravation of evaporation, and it can be effective for a longer period of year. It makes more important to consider water management and flooding, because it is flash precipitation, flash flooding. These are hydrographs of various heavy rains in Istanbul in recent years. As you see from that graphs, the precipitation reached its peak very suddenly. Flash rains result in flash floods, especially in urban areas. Also, the topography in Istanbul is challenging. As a result of topography of Istanbul, there are so many creeks and subbasins. This makes us consider all these creeks and streams when making urbanization plans. That's why flood protection becomes essential, because your urban areas are growing along all these creeks. First, in order to be flood protection, we make stream restorations. We try to choose the best cross section. I say try because it isn't as easy as making projects or imagine the best. Because cross sections depends on, of course, we want to make the most efficient one for hydraulic conditions. We make engineering calculations, hydrology and hydraulic calculations, and we have a cross section. However, land ownership in Istanbul is a very challenging topic, because if you want to make a wider cross section, you need to occupy someone's land, and land prices in Istanbul is very high. So the budget of buying that land is much more than the construction budget. Also, as a result of some unplanned urbanization in recent decades, we should construct our new cross sections in urban areas. So making construction in urban areas is also another difficulty we face. These are some examples from our stream restorations. I will also mention about them later. Also, we have flood risk maps for all cracks, creeks, and streams in Istanbul. We share these maps with all municipalities in Istanbul. With these maps and models, we aim to determine areas with flood risks. In Istanbul, there are 39 local municipalities with metropolitan municipality. And each of these municipalities may have different approach to flood protection subject. This leads differences in urbanization and construction plans among different municipalities. Another important information we have from flood maps and we share with local municipalities is flood level. As I mentioned before, the land price is very high in Istanbul, so we cannot say people don't make a building here, here's a flood area. We can say that, we only can say that, yes, you can build something here, but there is a flood level here, and in case of any flooding, please make your building higher and make your plan according to this flood level and take your precautions in your building. We want people to build their houses above flood level. And above flood level, we want them to put their entrances, electricity and ventilation equipments, etc. The most important thing is here that we don't want any residential volumes under flood level in the building. Because if you look at the buildings, there are basement floors, and it isn't safe, especially on flood levels. We want contractors to make parking lots and auto parks in that levels and using good insulations in their auto park doors. And we want all municipalities to make their urban plans by considering our flood maps and flood risk levels. These are some examples from different regions. I choose them because they are from Istanbul and summarize what I want to talk about. The upper ones are new buildings and they use our flood level and make good designs. If you look at the buildings, they are high and their windows are above flood level. On the other hand, the tragic, there is a flooding and some municipality officer is trying to save someone in a basement floor. If you are in a basement floor, very small amount of water is enough to make a disaster because you are above the flood level, so the water rises until the ceiling. Especially people with some disadvantages are much more in danger, like children or old or handicapped people. Or if you are sleeping, you also have no chance. I really stayed to put this photograph in my presentation, not that I decided to put. I don't want to be where this still is. It's in Istanbul somewhere. Here, behind that dustbin, there is a stream here, and for these buildings, there are new ones and there is an old one. In the old one, people made a higher entrance for the building because they thought that there is a stream here and there will be some flood risk here. And now we make a flood model here and we gave it to the municipality. This building is maybe more than 50 years old. There were no flood maps. There is nothing just for maybe their experience. They made this. But these buildings, maybe you can see the basement floors here. So I think sometimes there is nothing to say. I want to just share the picture. Not only between different local municipalities, there is also difference between buildings on the same streets. Here, there is a difference between the old one and the new one. But maybe in some cities you see that there are two new buildings. One is appropriate for flood risk level, another one has a basement. And if you investigate and question how the municipality asked our thought for one building, one construction. For the other one, they did not ask anything for us. So that differences can be seen. This subject should be close to interpretation. Certain rules and regulations for all regions is needed. To make a general idea, I want to speak some about Ayamama Stream, maybe a case study. Ayamama Stream has a very large watershed, more than 65 kilometers square. Both urbanized and rural areas we see in the watershed. But there is something important here. Ayamama Stream has an intersection with two major highways of Istanbul. One is here, Trans-European Waterway, and the other one, A5 highway. These are the most crowded and largest highways of Istanbul, main highways of Istanbul. In September 9 of 2009, there was a flood and it was a real disaster in Ayamama. Unfortunately, 32 people. When talking about these subjects, defining people and life numbers can be easy, but it wasn't so easy. There are more than numbers in those lives. For that flooding, I want to mention how much precipitation was observed. The precipitation intensity was much more higher than the previous events. Return period is higher than 100 years. we think that it's a result of climate change and some local issues. These are our precipitation detection stations. We see that in 2 hours or 3 hours, we have more than 130 millimeters precipitation. I have an animation. This animation shows, this map shows the Ayamama watershed and stream. Also here, there is some glitter area. Here there is a dam. During the heavy rain, this dam also collapsed. So, as a result of heavy rain and this dam break, we have a flooding. I want to watch. Starting. Firstly, the water is starting to accumulating over above E5 highway. Here it is Trans-European highway. There is also some sort of bridge here. There's no problem, but the problems started to appear as time goes. It's increasing. There is no dam break until now. Without dam break, we also have flooding. And water began to come from here, from that, and the entrance in the intersection of here, the accumulation of water started. And all the water came. And here we have serious flooding because the water cannot go to the other side of the highway. And there's a here large truck parking lot here. Lots of trucks and other vehicles began to collapse and enter to the street and stuck in the water. And water started to rise and overlaps the highway. Now the highway is underwater. I want to share this with you to show that not only making the proper cross sections is enough to protect your city from flooding. There may be another issue like any dam or the cross section does not in your authority. The highway government department which is responsible for highways is also interested there. Also, the cleaning of that intersection is important. Also here there is a very heavy residence and very urban area. There is only gray color here. So we had a disaster. After that flooding, our municipality decided to make giant cross sections for Ayamama prevent flooding, but it is still going on. Yes, mostly our municipality finished and our administrations, water and sewage administration finished building, but there are also some parts which is not finished yet. It's a very large cross section, as you see, and in Istanbul, our streams, in our stream, generally we see water in rainy days. We do not have rivers. So, just for a few days in a year, we use a large cross section. It is the cross section of our project, and we have wastewater pipelines parallel to the stream, and we have real stream and the base flow area. Here, in recent years, we wanted to make more ecological, more beautiful land and stream restorations. With that idea, for various streams in Istanbul, with our valuable Professor Hayriye Eşraf Tuncay, we work really hard for most of the rivers and make stream restorations. And here, in doing that project, I learned something. Making proper stream restorations is only possible when you work together with different disciplines, not only hydrology, hydraulics, but also landscape engineers, urban planners, architects, transportation engineers, because streams are the main lines in a state. So you should think a bit wider. Here, in the cross section I showed before, we want some social areas like these. People can use that areas during dry seasons, and during rain, with an alarm system or something else, people can live there, and we can use that area for drainage. Now we have projects in the near future. I hope we should go further and make more ecological and social stream areas. I really thank you for your attention and listening to me. I don't know if it is possible to receive questions or anything else I can do.
We don't have a question and answer session after this.
I don't know.
But if anyone has a quick question, so
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we are very grateful for tonight Sharkar for his remarks from his professional experiences. I know everyone is so tired. I know that it was a very hard day for you, so I wanted to make it more agile. But after Mr. Frank Sharkar, I want to introduce Mert Yaman, because Mr. Frank's experiences are more on metropolitan scale. He's a metropolitan organization, so Mert Yaman's experience is more local district level. Mr. Frank showed us a map that Istanbul has 39 districts. So Mert works for one of these districts called Kadıköy. He's a graduate student, graduate of urban and regional planning. He worked as an urban planner focused on mostly transportation, mobility in Kadıköy municipality and infrastructure projects for over 10 years. Now I want to introduce him and so.
Hello, I'm Mark Evan. I'm an urban planner working for Kadıköy Municipality. I would like to briefly share Kadıköy's experience with you. Kadıköy is a major district in Istanbul tourist site. It's located here on the map. It has almost 500,000 population. It's the new social center of Istanbul. It's considered the new social center of Istanbul. And the main transportation hub on the tourist site. It's relatively flat in terms of geography. It's relatively flat than the other districts in Istanbul. However, this poses another problem. We have three major valleys in Kadıköy. One is in Koşuyolu, it's a minor stream. The major streams, Grubaldere, and there is also Koşuyolu Bostancı side. So it's a stream that crosses, Grubaldere is a stream that crosses the entire Anatolia side from north to south. Grubaldere had been a recreational spectacle since the 19th century. However, Grubaldere had already been sending out signals in the 90s with it's due to the smell. The most important problem people recognized at first was the water was still, and because of the flat geography. As a person, I can say, being someone who grew up along that river, it was really unbearable during that time. But we had other problems rising up. We were aware that there had been huge amounts of precipitation, solid waste precipitation in the water in Grubaldere. So in 2010, there was a flood that hit Kadıköy due to heavy rain. It even took, I think that flood took 38 lives in Istanbul totally. One worker also lost his life in the efforts against the flood. The area started flooding, and it was a flash flood caused by heavy rain. It hit all of Istanbul, even 45 kilogram per meter squares of rain suddenly fell on Kadıköy, causing the stream to flood in a very short time. In 2014, the flood hit again. There was remediation construction also halted. The artificial banks, which was created alongside the stream for cleaning the precipitation at the bottom, actually made things worse. Even a much lower amount of rain fell. It was a really big disaster. Kadıköy, in the frame of our scope of authority, being a victim of the flood, started focusing on surface drainage remediation. We started designing our streets much more in context of water drainage, surface water drainage, rainwater drainage channel construction and repairs. We included rainwater drainage channel constructions and repairs inside our street renewal project. We started coordinating with Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality in the renewal of the waste water channels, because they were, during the floods, they were also flooding, and it was also creating a health problem, a health issue as well. In preparation, we also started a rescue, search and rescue team, a municipal search and rescue team for these sorts of disasters. We also organized a project contest for this remediation of this area, the watershed area around Grubaldere. These are street renewal projects in central neighborhoods. We started, as I said, in the scope of our authority, we went as far as we could when renewing our streets. You can see water channels, etc., all renewed, and this would decrease the precipitation inside this would that were discharging into the stream drastically. And also maintenance of rainwater infrastructure was really important. We hadn't recognized that until the flood in 2010. But after the flood, cleaning and rehabilitating our current rainwater channels was a priority. Also, the project contest for Valdere was really important, I think. Kadıköy Municipality called for a project competition. Even though the project ideas were enlightening, no one had considered the land ownerships and expropriation factors when you start to just urbanize the area. All of the projects were considering urbanizing the area. You can see the buildings that will be demolished by nearly all of the concepts that were proposed. The red ones are indicated here. Many of the concepts rightfully stated the surrounding area should have been urbanized, but a large proportion of the area was already inside the urban renewal zones in Fikirtepe and Hasanpaşa. You can see the urban renewal zone here. Also, this was a area that halted the construction. You can see the slums around and a few large structures here. All of this area, and Kurvaldere is here. You can see Kurvaldere going through here. This was also a big problem because we had no way of gaining land, obtaining this land in order to urbanize it. It was all land-owned. So, in 2012, by Metropolitan Municipality, the remediation of Kurvaldere started, officially started. This is the project inside Kadıköy district. As I said, it's a huge street that goes a very long way to the north of Istanbul. Also, the project also included a complete overhaul of the waterfront in terms of recreational functions, because it was a really important. We have Watershed Park here. It's a really important recreational space. We have also Topography Park over here, and also Moda, the famous Moda is here. So it was a really important space for recreational purposes also. Artificial temporary banks, the ones I mentioned that I think made flood bursts were constructed in preparation for precipitation cleaning. Precipitation was almost at the point of once these sets were built, these banks were built. We and also the Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality recognized that it was almost clogging the entire stream. So they started digging. The height of 1.5 meters was cut down to 5.2 meters, so expanding the stream bed was really necessary in order to prevent further flooding. So you can see the dug-up area here, the height of the dug-up area. This was an addition to the previous stream remediation works. So waterfront was also completely overhauled in accordance with recreational purposes considered. There were also, as I mentioned before, the water was not really moving as much as it should be, so people started considering the force mains. They were considered both upstream and downstream. One was in Moda waterfront, and the other one was in the municipalities, north of the municipality. And also a replacement channel was built. This was to prevent white wastewater from pouring into the stream. A TBM wastewater replacement tunnel was constructed. The channel connected the wastewater to the current water treatment facility on the other side of the Cafer district. This was a very painful works because this is the entire transportation load of Kadıköy. You can see here this area. So it was a really painful phase of the study. After we have completed the remediation of the Valdere, we still, the project was completed during the pandemic last year. But we must be, I think, aware of the real problem. These are only remedies for short-term. These are short-term solutions considering the urbanization level upwards, because Kadıköy is not only affected by Kadıköy, it's affected by Watershed and Urbanism, which are growing real fast. Also, the rain levels, the rain precipitation levels are increasing every year. But the most, these are unexpected flash flooding level raindrops. So, climate change is also a real important issue. This is also the recreational aspect of the study. So, thank you.
Thank you, Merteman, for your great presentation. As we all know, you see how this authority, level of authorities changes everything when you have take action about this flooding issue. So, seeing from one profession from ISKİ and after Mert's presentation was very beneficial for us. So, thank you. Now it's Matthias we have the Zoom, so he's ready. He's ready. Okay.
Yes. We'll give you a screen.
Yeah. So today we are great. So, hi Professor.
Can we hear him?
No, not because his microphone is off.
Here.
Morning.
Hi.
Hi.
Professor Matthias, sorry that we have only one camera, but everyone is seeing you from the venue, so I'm sorry that you're only facing to me, but so maybe before while you are arranging your professor presentation, I'm gonna make a quick introduction.
Okay.
Yeah. So we are grateful for having Matthias Pongol here in Turkey virtually. So thank you to these new technologies. He is professor of environmental planning and geography and co-director of the Global Metropolitan Studies program at the University of California, Berkeley, where he teaches river restoration, environmental planning, environmental science, and hydrology. Trained as a geologist, hydrologist, and fluent geomorphologist, his research focuses on human-river interactions, including managing flood-prone lands, urban rivers, river restoration, sustainable management of reservoirs, and regulated rivers. His 3 books and over 200 papers has received over 18,000 citations. citations. MET advises governments and non-governmental organizations serving 2 terms on the Environmental Advisory Board to the Chief of the U.S. Army Corps and Engineers, and providing expert testimony before the U.S. Congress. California Legislature, California Water Resource Control Board, U.S. Supreme Court, International Court of Justice, and the Permanent Court of Arbitration. And Matt was fellow at the Collegium of Lyon Institute for Advanced Study 2017 and 2018. We are honored to meet you and grateful for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Urban. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. And I'm going to try to bring up my slides. But you need to give me the capacity to share my screen. Right now, yeah. Okay, looks like that works. All right, I assume you can see my screen now.
You can see very clearly.
Okay, let's see. You. Try that. All right, that's better? Okay. And you can still see it, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, it's a pleasure to join you virtually. Sounds like a very interesting topic and opportunity that you all are talking about in the workshop. And
maybe if you can make it full screen, we can create more in a wide screen. But if you prefer to use like this, it's also okay.
okay. Now, I thought that I did make it full screen, but it's not completely. It's, you know, this is the problem. It's full screen on mine, but maybe not on yours.
No worries. You're still. You can still see your presentation. No worries.
Okay, well, I guess we're stuck with this. You'll have all these stuff in the top. Okay, so from what I understand of the situation, having the opportunity to potentially shift some of the activities and some of the buildings that are currently along the river and moving some of these up to the old airport site, and thereby giving the river some room to have a more natural corridor. It seems like you have a great potential opportunity there. So I'd like to touch on some current trends in river restoration in cities, and some of these that might have some relevance to some of the issues that you're addressing. So we see really all over the world now this trend of river restoration in city centers. Along many rivers flowing through the center of cities, in the past we had a lot of industry, navigation, infrastructure, all these sorts of things that have largely been displaced to other parts of the world or to other areas in the countryside. And so cities now have the opportunity to redevelop this amazing real estate right in the center of the city, these urban waterfronts. But these developments are usually managed as development opportunities, as economic development, and social and environmental needs are often assigned a much lower priority. And so this is, in many cases, an opportunity lost. Now, to understand the current situation in which we find our urban rivers, it's useful to think about how they've been altered by the process of urbanization. So perhaps the first and biggest impact would be pollution, both point and non-point source. These are terms introduced by the United States EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, as enforcement of the Clean Water Act evolved over the years. The first sources of pollution were pipes that were dumping sewage or industrial effluent into rivers. These were easy to see, and those were fixed first. And today we're dealing more with what we call non-point or diffused sources of pollution. And this would be the runoff from parking lots and from agricultural lands. Many rivers have had their flows abstracted, reduced by diversions for industry or agriculture or other purposes, hydroelectric. And the very fact of urbanizing a river catchment means that the runoff changes are going to, the runoff patterns are going to change. You're going to have more intense rainfall runoff. You're going to have more intense storms after the same rain. And you also will have water quality problems because all the contaminants that are lying on the ground, those will get swept into the river system rather than having the opportunity to be filtered as they would go through a forested area. So we have intensified flooding, water quality problems. And then the stream channels themselves are often encroached right up to the edge by building infrastructure. In cases like that, we have a very limited opportunity to make changes. Now, conventionally, cities have responded to this more intense runoff that they are getting from their urbanized watersheds with structural solutions. And these have included levees or dikes and dams, hardening the banks and putting in grade control in the channel to stop it from incising. And in many cases, what we call channelization, which is creating an artificial, usually straight channel, simplified geometry, and frequently lined with concrete. We have many of these channels across our landscape around San Francisco. But what we see is that today, people who live in these places, they don't really want a feature like this. This is a view of the channel of Walnut Creek, which is about 50 kilometers east of San Francisco. And you see here this stencil, danger, stay out, stay alive. And there have been kids who have foolishly thought that they could raft this concrete channel during a flood and have been killed. And it's, anyway, these channels are not very friendly to people or to wildlife. These kind of channelization projects also intensify the flood peaks downstream. They're very efficient in carrying the water, but that means that the downstream areas get hit harder. They're rigid. You cannot easily adjust these to changed hydrology. As the runoff from the catchment increases because of urbanization or climate change, you cannot easily enlarge a channel like this. So, and there's problems with water quality and so on. So there's a lot of interest in trying to convert these into more natural channels. But natural channels need room. And to restore real river process, you have to give the river some space where it can flood and erode and deposit and migrate. In dense urban environments, this will conflict with some of the existing land uses. The problem is these engineered channels were often built to maximize urban development, so you have buildings and infrastructure right up to the edge of the channel. So if you want to replace a concrete channel like this, you have to give the channel more room. And that may require removal of buildings, which in some cases that's feasible. In other places, it probably isn't because of the cost of changing the buildings, moving the buildings or eliminating. Now, we could say, okay, well, we're just stuck with these concrete channels. There's really nothing we can do about it. However, these concrete channels are a kind of infrastructure. And no infrastructure lasts forever. The service life of a concrete channel is typically 75 years. In the US, most of our concrete channels were built after the Second World War. So the period, let's say 1950 to maybe 1990. This is a picture of the freshly constructed concrete channel on Grayson Creek, California. Finished in 1957. And I hope you appreciate the nice clothes style and everything for all these officials who had gathered for the official ceremony. What they were not talking about at the time, and we're still not really talking about today, is what do we do when these things expire? What do we do with these concrete channels when they are too old and they're falling apart? This is impending infrastructure failure. Well, Contra Costa County, which is the home of this Grayson Creek channel that you just saw at Walnut Creek that I showed you before, the county there is committed to a goal of converting its concrete channels to natural channels over the next 50 years. It's called a 50-year plan. It's not really yet a plan, it's more of a vision. But I think it's really an important one for us to consider. Their goal is to turn these concrete channels back into natural channels when the concrete channels reach the end of their service lives. And this requires a lot of support for the cities, for land use planning, to try to accommodate this, to try to make room for these new channels. We just completed a study for the county on how they could implement the 50-year plan in the Walnut Creek watershed. And there's a link to it that you see on this slide. We do have some precedents for removing concrete channels. Increasingly, this is an example from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The Milwaukee Municipal Sewage District has been very active in removing concrete channels. We can look to them for inspiration, but they have a couple of key advantages which we don't have around the San Francisco region. They built all their projects locally with local money, whereas most of the projects around San Francisco were built with national or federal funds. And we have to get an act of Congress to deauthorize projects before we can remove a concrete channel. Also around Milwaukee, they have some funding from the Great Lakes Restoration Programs, which we don't have. But this is an example here. You see concrete being removed from the Menominee River in Milwaukee. The Los Angeles River is our most famous concrete channel. And there's a lot of hubbub about restoring the Los Angeles River today, which raises the question, is that even possible? And the answer is not really. There's too much development right up to the top of the riverbank. To restore a natural channel would require removing so much valuable infrastructure, buildings, and everything else. It's really just infeasible. The current restoration efforts are underway at specific places along the river where you have large parcels where you can convert to more natural habitat. I'm showing you the biggest parcel here. This is a map of the Los Angeles River going through the lower part of San Fernando Valley. And you see just how dense the development is right up to the edge of the river channel. There's really no place for the river to go or to have any kind of elbow room, as they would say in Bavaria. But here's the old railroad yard called Taylor Yard. And this is now to be the site of one of the biggest single parts of the river restoration project that is planned for the Los Angeles River. But again, this is really exceptional. Most of the river is going to stay the way it is because it's too expensive to make it wider. However, if you're in a situation where you can create a river corridor wide enough for the channel to migrate, to flood, erode, and deposit, and develop nice riparian vegetation, then you can have tremendous ecological and social benefits. The river corridor can serve as a linear central park through the city. This is an example not far from us, about an hour east. This is in the city of Sacramento, and this is the American River as it joins just downstream here. It's approaching the confluence with the Sacramento River. And the American River was, much of it was protected about 50 years ago in what's called the American River Parkway. So really a remarkable place. Also within the center of a very important urban area of Geneva, we have a very interesting example of a replacement of a concrete channel with a natural channel. This is a project that I've been involved with for a little over a decade. This is the Aire River, and here you see the channelized river that existed prior to the project. And the basic approach of this design team, George and Julia Ducombe and ADR architects, their idea was not to completely obliterate this canal from the landscape, but to fill it mostly in, leave a few parts to be focal points for human activity, picnic areas and things like that. And then to the south, or to the left in this photograph, to expand into what was then agricultural land. So they had about 200 meters worth of territory that they could take over, and on that allow the river to have a natural course. Now, the way that they managed this natural course of the river was interesting. They wanted the river to be able to choose its own course through a set of potential channels. They didn't want to impose a certain geometry, and what unfortunately happens in the United States a lot now is that some idealized geometry is dictated to the river, and since the river often doesn't cooperate on its own, the banks are fixed in place with boulders or other heavy elements. But in lieu of that, they wanted to allow the Aire River to freely adjust, to find its own course. And to explain this concept to the public, the designers used the analogy of a bar of Swiss chocolate, in which you have these grooves that have been cut. And those grooves provide the potential pathways for hot milk to flow. And the hot milk will erode channels through this grid of small proto-channels. And so that's exactly what was done on the Aire. This crisscrossing network of channels was excavated onto what was then the floodplain, with the idea that the Aire River would be able to then erode out its channel over time. And that's what we see has occurred. This is after the first year of very small floods that were able to already begin creating a more natural channel. This is a series of drone images from 2014, right after the network of crisscrossing channels was excavated. And then you can see as you go over time how we start getting the natural river channel cut out into this. And by the time you get to the last photo here, which is just a couple years later, 2016, was that? Yeah, 2016. It's already looking like a much different place. We have a paper on this coming out in Landscape Architecture Frontiers that has this image and some more description of the project. And if you go to the Aire River today, it's really like a green heart, a bit of wildness within a large urban area. Now, another important issue is water quality. And But water quality is a prerequisite to restoring ecological functions. Not only ecological, but social functions as well. You don't really want to encourage children to come and play in the river that's polluted. And we should think not only of the stream or the river itself, but also where this river flows to, the coastal areas that might be fed by the stream. So these linkages from the river to coast would be very important. You might not care so much if the local creek is polluted, but if that polluted creek then pollutes a beach downstream at the coast, you could have thousands of people exposed to the pathogens. This is exactly what occurred in Lisbon, in this estuarial coast to the east of Lisbon, a very important recreational area for the last century. It's been a place for wealthy and working class to go and enjoy the beaches. Yet the lands to the north, there are a series of streams that drain from north to south, feeding these beaches. These areas have been suburbanized with working class high-rise buildings, all of which are providing housing for people who then take east-west transportation routes, train lines and highways to get into Lisbon to work. But many of these were built in the 1970s and 80s, and many did not have proper sewage connections, a lot of illegal construction. So what we see is these streams here have been heavily polluted and are bringing this pollution to the beach, and the beaches have been shut down with a lot of implications. So the managers in this region have undertaken a program to try to track down these sources of pollution and begin to correct them. It's a complicated job, it's still underway, but a lot of improvement has already been demonstrated. And finally, what can we see as the possibilities of rivers as urban space? Well, when you have a river that's allowed to be natural, like the Air River, you have a lot of possibilities, and you can let the river be its own architect for sure. But even if you have a more constrained environment, there are always some possibilities for people to interact with the river. I had a student in Longshu, China, who did a project looking at how children were using the banks of the Yellow River as it flows through the city. And I think his photos really captured very well what you see frequently when you go to the edge of the river. And kids are there, they're picking up stones and throwing the stones, they're finding little animals or fish. There's just a host of ways in which people can interact so long as the water is clean enough. You don't want to encourage this if the water is really dangerously contaminated. And this gets us to this idea of social connectivity. So connectivity in rivers has been developed in the environmental sciences, the idea that you have longitudinal, lateral, and vertical connectivity. And we can apply this concept as well to social functions, to the movement of people, goods, ideas, and culture along and across rivers. So borrowing this framework for the environmental sciences, we can look at our activities along rivers. And we can see how we can restore, for example, lateral connectivity. Again, going back to my first point that many of these center cities with their rivers along which they were built, as the industry has moved, you have the opportunities now to bring people directly along the river. In Lyon, France, a major urban renovation project undertaken along the banks of the Rhone in the early 2000s. Of course, the Rhone and the Saône, which appears on the left of this oblique aerial image, are these two important rivers that come together in the city of Lyon. And the rivers have always been really the heart of the city. By the 1960s, though, the banks of the Rhone had been given over to parking. And you had prostitutes and drug dealers. It was not a very safe place to go. But then in the early 2000s, Mayor Coulon undertook this huge project in which they tore out the parking and created spaces for the people. The right wing was very opposed to this project, and their main argument was, we can't lose the parking. And so this project, in order to restore the riverbank, it required construction of massive underground parking structures right nearby to compensate for the loss of parking. But people use rivers in many different ways. Recreation is really important, going from this tributary of the Amazon in Ecuador to the Isar River in Munich, which is a wonderful example of an urban river that's been restored and is heavily used for recreation. Increasingly, kayaking and canoeing is very popular in urban rivers. This is the Milwaukee River in Milwaukee. And urban swimming in the Aar River in Bern, Switzerland. People will get in upstream of the city and sort of float downstream through the city. It's very popular. But again, this is the kind of thing that can only happen if you have good water quality. You don't want to encourage this otherwise. This is Reno, Nevada, a place called Wingfield Park in the center of the city. This was for essentially a concrete channel. They removed it, the concrete, they made it more natural, they created whitewater features. They have a whitewater competition here every spring when they have enough water in the river. And then the rest of the year, it's very popular for families to come and kids to swim. So this is an example of what we could call a quaternary sector use, urban streams that are now consumed as recreational space. And the homeless and the marginal uses, the drug dealers and the prostitutes that used to be here are now displaced or somewhere else. And we can, looking at these different human uses of the river, we can identify a gradient of passive to active uses and uses that are up on the bank to uses that are down in the channel. And we can see a kind of a two-dimensional space like this from active to passive, from up on the banks to down in the channel. Here you would have swimming, an active use in the channel. Here you would have what we call quiet, secluded use, which is up on the banks. An example of restoring vertical connectivity is the construction of wooden platforms along the Rhone in Geneva. Here is the confluence of the Aar River coming in from Mont Blanc with its load of glacial silt. And here's a relatively clear water coming from Lake Geneva. And here you see these platforms that have been built. And the idea is you had these concrete walls before, vertical concrete walls. So it would have been theoretically possible for you to jump into the river and swim, but you couldn't get out. Now with these wooden platforms, you have a way of easily getting out of the river. So this provides access and riverside gathering spaces. On summer days, these platforms are heavily used. Many people will swim down the full 500-meter length of the platform. They're distributed along this about 500-meter length. This platform is one of the biggest, and this is where you should definitely get out, because otherwise you are going to go downstream and hit the confluence with the Aar, which is extremely cold water from just melted from the glaciers up on Mont Blanc. So that's well, and then just to wrap up, there are many events that are set along this newly reconnected riverbank. So it's a very popular place. It's proved to be a huge success. So this is a very quick tour of some of the aspects of river restoration in the urban context. And some of these might provide some food for thought for you as you're encountering your project on the Ayamama.
Çok sağ olun. Yes, thank you for your thank you for this fantastic presentation. I learned so much about approaches for river restoration projects that address flood mitigation and waterway resilience in urban contexts. And there are lots of ITU students here. Honestly, that I cannot show you, but they listen to you with enthusiasm, and I don't know, I cannot thank you enough for your time. So I don't know this, what can we do for you, but we just maybe we can do this. So to maybe yeah no. So all these people. So thank you so much.
Thank you. That was a pleasure.
So bye.
Okay, good luck with your project.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Hello everyone, let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Gökçer Okumuş. I'm here as a representative of Istanbul Metropolitan Parks and Recreation Department. And I want to talk about Ayamama River Life project, which was ongoing right now. The main approach of Weather of Life concept in Istanbul is revealing new public and green space corridors in the city by using the riverbeds, creating corridors for wildlife or gives chance for the wildlife. And the main built environment element of this corridor work is creating a continuous bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, especially. And we have around 16 weather of life locations around Istanbul, which you can see in the map. Most of them are dry streamlines, as Suhaib Chapar also mentioned before. We don't have any kind of rivers that Professor Kondov showed us. And also speaking after him is a little bit hard for me, so forgive me. And the existing situation, we can say built environment we have a built environment which has no relation with the river, as we saw today also. And also through time, through the history, we have seen these riverbeds as a potential for roads, because we have very hard topographical issues in Istanbul. So these are natural highways of our road system. And we have a fast urban redevelopment process through 10 years from now, 10 or 20 years from now. And this is the general view of 3D mesh view of, especially starting from the Marmara Sea to the north. And you can see the abandoned Atatürk Airport and the Atatürk residential area, which was started around 50s and finished. Most of them were finished around 90s, and also this part is the This part is the sixth phase of named as the sixth phase of the Ataköy residential complex, but didn't hadn't be built until 2005 around, because of being in the flood zone also. They expend lots of money to build this project. But after that, 5 years from now, we also make this shoreline as a residential area or mixed-use area to build these gigantic buildings, unfortunately. And when we are walking around today, I have also shown these maps I have prepared for this presentation, which shows the topography of the Ayamama River and the source points. And we have stopped our first stopping point is last year. Yes, and we passed through this riverbed, and we stopped that part, which is the most dangerous flooding zone, and other parts. And the right side, at the right side, you can see the situation in the 80s. This 1984 satellite view, and as you can see, most of the area were agricultural and rural area, and we can see the traces of the second arterial highway of Istanbul, E6 or TEM. It has two names. And we can see also the pattern of the ownership. There are lots of small pieces of parcels around the river. Then at the left side, it is from 2020 years after the first map, 2004. We can see lots of developments on the Ayamama River bed because of having also this arterial roads are being built at that time and working very densely as well. And also there is a industrial zone here developed in that period. Also, we have also Turkey port here, and lots of also in the 90s and after the 80s, after the road developed, Ayamama River turns to be an industrial zone also, and the residential areas surrounded that industrial area resulted in that pattern, mass urban development area. And 20 years from that, actually 15 years, 2020, the remaining parts to the Küçükçekmece Lake also come with lots of mass housing projects. But most of them, the areas that we can see void as in 2004 were governmental areas as ownership. So they were built in one hand, and we have a governmental organization called TOKI, which built those areas in one hand and quickly. And as you can see, the most of the branches which has sources of the Ayamama River is on the military zone, and it is planned as 1/3 of that area is planned as a residential development zone also. But as I mentioned in the field trip, those areas are much more river friendly, let's say. The streamlines are reserved for recreation and green areas. But as we can see in the left side, this is the 5,000 development plan of the area, and we see the red areas, which means commercial and especially residential, high-density residential and commercial area, redevelopment area, and we also see some new highways passing through the left side of the Ayamama River. And at the right, we can see that highway projects which were prepared before today's administration. And when those projects came to the table, if we want to, we decided that if we want to prepare a Valley of Life project for the Ayamama River, we have to start with the transportation. We have to cancel most of these road proposals. Of course, something, especially abandonment of closing of the Atatürk Airport helped us to cancel those kind of highway projects also. Especially this part, the newest part to the Atatürk Airport, this road just surrounds the Ayamama riverbed, and we cannot have any kind of recreation area if we store this road system. And the ownership map, this also what is the main problematic area. One of the challenges of the area is the ownership. Most of the ownership belongs to government. So if you think like that, it's a real advantages kind of thing. But in Istanbul, we are the opposition party for the government. So taking permissions to develop some projects over that land is a kind of challenge. Thing. So we are working on it. But we have some advantages around this area, which has no ownership. It's also some kind of strange thing. But after doing this project, I think Ayamama will own this map also. It's also a 3D mesh map which shows the surrounding uses and especially the border of the project. Of course, because of the length of and the huge problematic area of Ayamama River, I measured it as 18 kilometers kilometers from source to the end. Only 40 kilometers is done for the recreation, especially around the Watershed region that we saw in the first stopping point. And we have started this project area as 6 kilometers. So there are left another 8 kilometers that is under construction by the Sewage and Water Department of Istanbul, also as we saw today. And this is the border. First of all, we had an agreement with the design team to work on this area to create a conceptual work. But our main approach was, like as I said before, the connections, continuous pedestrian and bikeways, but especially a much more buildable, fast buildable project, and also inexpensive one. But after taking that project, we had also lots of challenges with the other departments of the municipality also, which has already developed some projects around these areas, and also some, as we see in the field today, there are lots of connection problems of these huge pieces of land, especially around Çobançeşme junction. There are only passing spaces for the river. There isn't any space, room for pedestrian or bikeway passing. So they proposed a high elevated bridge over those infrastructure, but it will be very expensive to do it, and maybe we cannot force people to move over that very high and lonely infrastructure over that highway area. So, as I mentioned before, first of all, we take transportation into consideration, and especially also we had lots of opportunities of that area that we can connect all of the area to the rest of Istanbul also. We had Marmaray, we had also, which was built 20 years before the Atatürk Airport rail subway, and nowadays it is under construction that Ataköy to Italy subway project, which has one station with Marmaray junction, combination with the Marmaray station, and another possible entrance to the Ayamama River project is the Ataköy station, and the Çobançeşme station, which we can connect it to the Çobançeşme region of the area. And as I mentioned before, cancelling the proposed road solution for Çobançeşme crossing, we take this place into consideration to find small improvements to pass this junction, and we just wanted to build underpasses 5 meter wide and 2.5 meter elevation, which has elevation or ceiling height, passing through the highway ramps to the underpass of E5. And also by doing this, we had the opportunity to link the metro bus line to that region also, which passes through from Beylikdüzü to Kadıköy. It's one of the major transportation lines, mass transportation lines in Istanbul, and we can take people to this level also to join them to the Development Life project. And also we can take people to the near and to see the old historical bridge also. And from, you can see much more closer. And we have also a small, what is it, Çeşme? Fountain, located here. Also, the most problematic point is the passing through the Basın Express highway. And we found that the former underpass of Ayamama River still lies there. So we can dig it and use it for the pedestrian and bikeway connection. After that, we give it to one of another company to go on preparing education projects, which is called Vintage. They prepared with also coordination with us, especially on the first phase of the project. And we in municipality, in Parks and Recreation Department, we developed that riverside pedestrian and bikeway, and prepared some images for the development of the area. Also, there are some remaining parts of remediation which will be done by Sewage and Water Department. And after that, we can continue on apply this project to the land. Another crossing problem is the Kennedy Highway. We call it Kennedy Highway. No, this is Ralph Orwell road in our coastal highway, on our coastal highway, which also was built around 70s, so it's also an old bridge which can collapse in the earthquake that we are waiting for. And we proposed a three-pillar bridge, how can I say? bridge to allow our pedestrian and bikeway pass through to the Marmara Sea. And it, also they had that kind of proposal which is stored in the municipality, but they prepared this project for the surrounding road of the Ayamama. But we took that on the bridge part of the project and used it for the connection purposes. Also, we worked with the sewage and water department to give room for them to cleaning purposes of the river. So we didn't design any kind of functional areas around the river also, just for walking, and also the wideness of the road relates with the excavators that they use. And at the end, we proposed that kind of pedestrian and bike bridge, which can also let some kind of cleaning vehicles pass under the bridge. And also those spaces are owned by the government, which was named as the recreational area of those projects. But we are continuing on working to publicize that area also, and which will give a chance to create a starting point that will connect Ayamama River to the rest of the shoreline of Istanbul also. These are some detailed drawings. And also we have some kind of demands from some, it's a little bit strange ideas also. There's a lotus flower collector, which he wants to, he demanded a place for his lotus collection to present. He didn't have enough space for this, and demanded it from the Parks and Recreation Department and also the Mayor of Istanbul to locate this, and we found this place to do this. And of course, it's much more like a grocery store, but he demanded it, and he is very obsessive about how to grow that, or grow that lotus flower and give the requirements of that project by himself. And our teammates developed this project also in that area. It was a former construction zone also. And lots of recreation areas like festival zones, some other seasonal usage areas, sport areas, that kind of things. Yes, I want to stop here. Thank you for listening. Sorry for the Turkish. I can send an English version of this later. Thank you.
So, thank you, Gökçer. Now we will continue with Rafi's presentation. And so, I have already introduced.
Yeah, you don't.
Yeah, so Rafi, and so
Thank you.
yes.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Jude Mabsoud, who's a researcher and our team, will also join, and you can start and present our early research. I mean, we heard a lot of this, just to give context of what we do.
Hi everyone. We're really happy to be here, so thank you for hosting us. So our project is called Swap Strategy for Urban Resilience, and Rafi already gave us a background of how this project started earlier. And the project team is made from an interdisciplinary team from researcher Olivia Serra, who's with us today, also researcher at SEU, Kelly Leilani, planner who is at MIT, and Nishid Ruksan, who is an independent scholar and who is a research architectural historian on this project. And we have local collaborators who are also present, from Professor Maria Esba and Professor Regeneration. And so with that, I'll begin with the introduction of the project. So as a lot of this is things we've already seen today. So as we know that there are projected changes in climate variables, and we know that there's a lot of higher precipitation rates, but also higher surface temperatures that are rising across the world. And within Istanbul specifically, there's a lack of open space, and with the effect of climate change, there's an increase in intensity and frequency of rainfall and precipitation. And with the cause of urbanization, there's a lack of open space. There's a huge effect on earthquake risk, where a lot of people don't have other places to relocate with the damage of earthquake risk. And the rapid urbanization in Istanbul has been encroaching in the natural hydrological systems. As you can see, the red layer of urbanization overlapped here on the natural topography of the terrain. And this impact of urbanization is threatening the water quality and increasing the risk of flooding in cities, because there's a lack of impervious surfaces, and it's preventing the water to flow naturally in the cities. So within the Ayamama River in Istanbul, as we've already discussed today, there's a degradation of urban watersheds and an increase of flood risk due to urbanization. And this is showing the urbanization over time from the 1990s to 2016. As you can see, urbanization is encroaching uphills into the urban watersheds. And within that context, while studying the Ayamama River watershed, it's located right next to the Istanbul Atatürk Airport, which is also connected to the increase of urbanization and increase in economic development, industrial development. And that has led also to a population increase along the Ayamama River. So the stream over here, and you see that the districts have to be subdivided in the population region as well. And the transformation of the site has been from a highly agricultural land to heavily urbanized land. And so studying the Ayamama watersheds through an urban analysis looking at economy and transportation, we know that there's the Trans-European Highway and the E5 highway that have created a huge increase in economic development and creating this economic corridor at the 007 highway along the river. And with that economic development, the river had to be channelized to increase the space for development. And so we've seen the increase in flooding due to that, but also with the examples you've seen today, the river restoration has come in the form of channelization. And these remedies have come as a reaction to the increase of flooding, but they also call for questions of how can we not only remediate and channelize, but how can we restore urban streams. And we can see examples across the world, and of course from today's lectures, different examples of restoration. Looking back at the Ayamama watershed scale, we can see the risk of flooding within the floodplain. Over here, you can see the area of the 2009 flood, but also this overlap or this contradiction between the water stream and the transportation infrastructure. So there's this kind of like fight or this contradiction between the economy that wants to expand and more transportation that's expanding and the increase in flood risk. And with that, we can also see the importance of studying the watershed through the hydrological layers and also through topographic layers in order to start assessing the areas that are actually at risk of flooding. And you can see that at the lower elevations in blue, these areas are more at risk of flooding versus the higher elevations in yellow and red, which could be seen as safer zones. So connecting to infrastructure around the Ayamama River, we can locate the airport site over here as a safer zone, partially that intersects with the Ayamama River watershed. And with that, I would grab the see how to introduce the airport site.
Thank you. First to say that we're really grateful for this event because we learned so much on what's going on, but also we see and we hear that there is so much work already being done and realization that the river corridors need to be addressed. Part of the reason of calling this watershed urbanism is to create awareness, is to create more discussion around the watershed being an urban project, that it is a must. And between the value of life, which is a fantastic concept for the Ayamama, and other attempts in other places that we saw, I think it's really essential, and if we can help in any way to bring this situation to full awareness with the city and with other planning organizations and with government, if at all possible. Because it really is, as you've shown and we saw today, the population is growing, urbanization is happening, we have no control over that really, but if we can grow the awareness that we must have an urban project around the rivers, it's really for the well-being of the city and for the well-being of millions of people. And that to explain that, of course, as you all know, the city is an ongoing project. And in an ideal world, perhaps we identify the problem of the rivers and we fix it. But, you know, we also coming from the US and it's far from ideal. We know that we cannot imagine public investment without development, without capital gain. This is not something that is imposed on us, but something, a reality that we, practicality that we kind of take on. So when we approached this project and looking at waterways, we said, well, is there a way to make this viable? At least theoretically, is there a way that we could tie river restoration with economic benefit, with urban development? Because urban development, where money is to be made, it's a key to use that to improve other aspects of the city. And so we looked at it. We didn't realize in the beginning that we're putting ourselves in bigger problems by even talking about the airport. But nevertheless, as urbanists, we see the situation from far, more objectively, and we see a whole area which is in danger, and another decommissioned infrastructure, like in many cities, which is dry and safe. And so this is where the link became apparent. And so we asked, well, what is the plan for the airport? And we saw the plan for the airport. And we said, great, someone realizes that there needs to be open space. And the plan of the airport realized, and said, let's create open space. And we're all for it, because the city needs green space. The question is, does it need it here? Right? Isn't there a better place to have green space? Better in terms of serving more people, doing more than a park to walk in, really having an ecological impact. And just around the corner, or 4 miles, or 4 kilometers, or 10 kilometers upstream, we know that there is a place near the airport that needs that green. Now the model that has been used in this plan is a typical one that we see many cities do. They have an airport, and the airport becomes vacant, and for many political reasons, the easiest thing to do is to take a runway and to make it green. And many cities have been doing that, and we have a lot of examples. But here, right next to those runways, right next to that green, there's all this area that really needs that green. So the thought was, this swap strategy is a way to conceptualize and think that investment in river restoration is not out of nowhere. It's coming out of this open space that can exist right near. And in place of that open space, in parallel to that open space, development can happen that can support that. So the strategy is to tie, is to link 2 parts of the city that belong to the same geographical watershed, but to link them in terms of development and restoration. And this is what we've been doing to various scales, in various degrees, working to restore the floodplain, but at the same time to create new development opportunities. We explain it in this way, and there's so many other ways that we're trying to communicate this idea of the high-risk zone, the low-risk zone. If we can remove high-risk buildings from one place and relocate them in another, we can still develop a large part of the airport site. At the same time, create this linear green corridor, which we saw that everyone here, at least, is in agreement that it is the right thing to do. And so to arrive at a vision plan that has both green and development and commercial and new residential zone. And this is very telling. The plan currently, you see, 240 hectares of green space. And combining that in a new vision, where there still is green space on the airport site, we can arrive at 550 hectares of green space, combined with the corridor in a form that makes much more sense for the city and for the environment. This is really the crux of our large-scale vision here. And now we're at the point of developing this into smaller sections, fragments, using a lot of the ideas and the resources and the knowledge that is here in order to promote this idea.
Professor Rafi for this great presentation, and now we will continue on our presentation with Professor Hayri Eşbah and Gülşen Aytaç. As you know, this whole process, this watershed urbanism process with the MIT, but actually this process has more than this. The ITU, Istanbul Technical University, made this process as a course, ongoing on workshops. We are having this only this professional workshop, but they worked so, they worked so hard on this project. So I'm grateful for Professor Hayri and Professor Aytaç, and so.
Actually, I don't have any presentation. I just wanted to say hi to everybody who wants to do the presentation. But I would like to say that it's very good opportunity for all of us to talk about this really crucial issue, which is a painful issue for Istanbul, as you can see. I mean, on the one side, there is this really sincere attempt of kind of like solving this river problem, and on the other side, there are a lot of challenges like that any city are facing around the world. But when we started in the history, actually, this area is in Istanbul, all the rivers, the Europeans would call Istanbul as the sweet waters. Because the rivers were so clean, and then the landscape was so pristine and so nice and so romantic, and therefore for the Europeans, it was the sweet waters of Istanbul. And then they carried that notion or the image to their drawings and to their literature, and it was also in the fabrics. It was part of the culture. So what we are seeing today as a disaster is actually a cultural heritage for all of us. Although as landscape architects we see them as a natural assets, but in Istanbul's case they are definitely the heritage. Those heritage corridors should begin again. So when we were talking about, when the Europeans were talking about as the sweet waters of Istanbul, the whole world was in this state. For example, in Boston, we had the development of the Boston, ruining all the watersheds and all the Bay Area, changing all that wetlands into a development, a very rigorous development at that time. And then there was this real visionary landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted, making this emerald necklace, which is still fascinating today, which still is an opportunity for Boston to solve or deal with its problem, the sea rise and all these problems. So the whole world was in a really bad state because they went into that industrialization period before us. So they built everything and then they start aiming. But then the process started later in Turkey. So we started, when we started, just like any kind of trend around the world, we did the same thing. We just ruined everything. What we are seeing right now is kind of like a combination of all these impacts throughout all these years. It mostly started from 1950s until today. But I think when the world is talking about, like starting from 1980s, when the world is talking about low impact development, sustainable urban drainage systems, water sensitive cities, there are like sponge cities, porous cities, like, we can name more of all of these. We need to discuss what we can do as a city to make this city more porous, more sponge-like, or more water sensitive, or maybe we can come up with our own model to solve it. And The river corridors are really important elements to solve the urban drainage. But we need to look at the issue from a much broader view, and we have to see it as an urbanism problem first rather than an ecological hazard. And we need to see these corridors as socio-ecological systems, just like the Rafi is indicating and the other presenters are indicating today. And as ITU, I'd like to speak a little more about my department. We are putting a great emphasis on the climate change and what's happening in our city and the implications of the climate change on our geography. We've been dedicating a theme for the semester, for example, starting from 2015, we had at least one semester dedicated to the issues of climate change, and then the other semester is dealing more of the social aspects of this transformation around the world. It's my personal academical route. I always started with the rivers and the water. The urban hydrology is my specialty, and therefore I would like to transfer some of this knowledge to my students. And these kind of international experiences are good opportunities for them to broaden their perspective, experience their ideas, or check their ideas with the international group. So I therefore thank Rafi for his crew and his research to my department and contributing to our students' knowledge, to our department's profile, which is a very international profile, by the way. We have a lot of international connections, and we are happy to extend that connection with the MIT. So that's all from me, because Gülşen did most of the job, and I'm just here as the department head, and I will just leave the floor to her. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rajeshpa. Yeah, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. We started with work on the Watershed Urbanism with Izmir River. And just because of you again, Professor Espa, she introduced us urban, she has specialized on urban hydrology. So she broadened our perspectives on this subject. So thank you so much. And also thank you so much for nice collaboration. And it has been a really great opportunity. And it is also a very nice opportunity for us to be here on this day, and for the technical trip, and for everybody's, each of the speakers' speeches, because we have learned a lot. There's so much work, I think, has been done on the site, and we have learned by your wonderful, fascinating presentations. This is a poster of our workshop. So it's just today is just the 3rd week of our semester. It just started on the 4th of October. So it has been a really tight schedule for us, for our students, and it has been a really unexpected period for us after the COVID situation. And we started. Yes, these are our team, and So, as everybody stated, the importance of the risks, disasters in Turkey, and in orderly, it is the first disaster in Turkey, flooding situations. This is an image from 2009, and it is Gökçer especially stated and elaborated us really nice in terms of the land use, topography, transportation network. But from the perspective of our students, firstly they are asked to do the entire area's 3D model. So they try to complete the 3D model in Rhino, and they try to understand and explore what are the problems. So they just started from the beginning and they try to understand by the starting point. So this is their analysis. This is the green areas and transportation network. So according to their view, they saw the continuous green network on the coast, but they cannot see a green continuation zone, green continuity in the inner part of the cities. All these green spaces are so much fragmented and they are not connected to each other. So this is the flood analysis, and we saw, I forgot, sorry for the name, but we saw this analysis very detailed, and they chronologically they did several physical and social analyses, and they revealed how the urban texture of green spaces and the transportation transformed chronologically from 1960s till today. So these are all the analysis, the change of the coastline, the change of the green system, change of the transportation network. So how the urbanization also encroached to the greenlands and the river corridor. And this is the change of the urbanization. And I just skip, and I want to come to the other point, very important point, from the perspective of the students, and they have interviews in the site. So they revealed that not only the physical conditions show us the problems of the site, they also explore by the citizens the problems of the site. So this is the group first. I want to just I don't want to skip because I think it's an important case. They have made interviews. This is Mrs. Ümit, and they made their interpretations by drawing. And this is Mrs. Ümit, and she's living in Topography. And she asked about how you find Ayamama. What do you know about Ayamama? And her answer was, interestingly, was flood and the people died. So she remembered that day and the occasion. So, but then she has been told me that this area, this region, had been a recreational area a long time ago. And also she's suffering from the lack of the pedestrian flows, continuation, bike paths, and the let's say pedestrian-friendly transportation networks. And she told us she even doesn't want to look out the window anymore. She just sees concrete jungle, and when she goes out to breathe, she cannot find a place to go. She cannot reach the coastal line, and also she cannot reach the riverside. So this is the problem, and it relates very intimately that problem. So this is what she said, and she then our students made a section and put the point where she lives, and this is the existing situation. And then they also did the before and after, like they studied on the how they can solve her problem. So of course, they call it urban movement, their project. Of course, it's very time labor, and they decided to at least to have continuous pedestrian and bike flow, and they would like to have crossings, just what we have emphasized a lot on the U-shaped concrete section. So they have to cross between two sides of the river. This is the solution. And yes, this is the solution. And so they have overpasses, underpasses, pedestrian crossings, bicycle and knee walking paths, what she needs in her dream. So this is another group. He's 20 years old guy, Gökay, again from the south. But he has his house in Ataköy, and he's coming every morning to the site with using bus. So what is his problem? He's saying that between the bus stop to the job, to the house, it takes 25 minutes. So it means a lot. So he wants to, like my students' aim was to how we can decrease the limit of the duration of the time. So then they, this is the section which road he is using, Gökay is using, and how he overpasses, underpasses, or how he can reach from bus stop to his work. And yes, these are the different outer sections. So they need safe and very safe and continuous pedestrian access. So again, and also he added the purification problem of the river and pollution of the river. So because of the smell. So they just work on the continuation of the traffic flow and the continuation of the pedestrian flow. And this is another group, the third group. I think I just want to skip because it's not so readable, so I want to come to Salih Sevras, the fourth group. This is 26 years old Emir. He leaves his house to go to his job in Ataköy. Is this? Yeah, it's good. So, okay, I mixed some of the slides, but it is about, again, the safeness of the pedestrian flow and the lack of the bike-cross pedestrian roads. And this is the section, and this is the flow of the pedestrian pattern. Yeah. So now he walks comfortably on the wider pavements and design. When he reaches the intersection of the roads, he can safely cross the opposite road through the pedestrian crossings that they made. So now they can also socialize in the safer zones, social clubs. And this is another group. He is 42 years old and he lives with his wife, 2 children and a dog. He is satisfied with his surrounding because surrounding the house there is also green space, adequate green space. But he lives in a low-rise decent place in the north of the city. He doesn't feel the metropolitan structure of Istanbul while living there. There is a green area where he can take a walk when he leaves his house, but it is not a very defined space. It plays with a security problem, especially in the evening. The lighting is not inadequate. Selim Bey likes to take a walk in the morning and also with his family and also spends time in the night time. So They also, firstly, all of the students really seriously took consideration into the border of the wetland. So, as Professor Eschma was talking about the porosities and the sparsity, we preferably like make each spot, each area of we want to transform into sponge surface. So it's very important for them. So they would like to have green spaces in the and also they want to have the river in the natural bed. So they transformed this area into green, and with more furnitures in the nighttime and also in the daytime, they feel with these interpretations, they feel more secure and safe in this area. Yeah, these are all the sections. This is the after images. This is another group, Gökhan, 65 years old. He's a retired job, but now he's very keen on painting and music. So he wants to feel this like he wants to play and paint also in the out part of the cities. So he's questioning if we can have a chance to play and paint in the parks, like maybe Parisian parks in Paris. How we can experiment all these occasions in the outside as social natural lover, artistic soul, and wants to live in a safer space. So this is the section where he lives. He lives in the upper north, and this is the section till the green space. So yeah, they create great parks, like linear parks called central parks. We emphasized before, so it's a perfect area for nature lovers and artistic souls, and now it is more safer. So, as overall, as we have come to conclusion from the interviews with the citizens who reside, who work, and who have their education there, we draw a conclusion that the site needs a healthy link between the people and the water. So this is the biggest problem, biggest lack. There is no link. There is no dialogue between the people and the river, the water. As a team, our proposal seeks to restore and build the fluent green corridor along Ayamama River. Our aim is to convert the heavily human impacted with a long history industrial landfills and commercial use, we will create infrastructure into more accessible, permeable, and green, pedestrian and bike-friendly corridor. So our aim is to link the inaccessible sides of the water channel, transform the site into peaceful, accessible riverside with nice scenic views and lush green areas where people can stroll alongside the river. Today we have witnessed, instead of we see strolling people, we have seen really huge concrete pavements. So I hope one day we will see people from the northeast part to the south to the Marmara Coast. They can stroll and they can have a bike continuously. They can have a walk continuously. So instead of the tiny impermeable green areas, it is going to be provided water-related experiences for local people and visitors. It should be added like bike lanes, green sidewalks for the people's daily life. As an example, in one interview we have seen the spend time from the metro station to the home was about 25 minutes, and we have discussed also with Rafi and the team how long do we spend on our daily life, from the metro station, from our stops to the home, how long does it take? So it needs to be reduced at around 10 minutes with different types of green activities. We need to serve people different typologies, different activities of green spaces. Overall, we propose not only the connection between communities, but also to create identified resilient corridor builds the foundation of social and economic development of the future. Thank you so much. This is the work thought done by our students. So, thank you for listening.
Professor Deschamps, I think they were very fantastic works that the students did, and you were talking mostly about this spatial dimensions, but we saw very individuals perspective here. So thank you, and thank you for your efforts for these groups. So
our group is here, by the way. We would like to thank them.
Of course, yes. And now we are here at the end of our symposium. Now I'm going to introduce Edin Zaim. I in particular wanted him to be here. He was my former colleague. We worked in various projects around Istanbul, but now he's working for Istanbul Planning Agency. It's a new developed institution to create a new kind of vision for Istanbul metropolitan area. So thank you for being here. So welcome.
Thanks for inviting me. This is also the latest one, so I will try to express it. I briefly give some features of Istanbul's development pattern and try to connect it to your topic of Ayamama. So, mainly, as you know, starting from the 50s, there is a excessive population boom and urban expansion within. Ayamama is somewhere here and really developing that massive construction effort. So this period of this type of urbanization or practice of the urbanization of Istanbul gives two main features, I think, or two very key features that shape and also which are shaped by this process. So first, it's intensified graduates. It includes also some, informal. First, it's developed by informally, and you may see here like how there's very small, very fine-grained buildings and high-rise buildings are together. So mainly it results in that fine-grained pattern, fine-grained fabric of Istanbul, mainly. As Gökçe presented, showed the ownership, so it gives different problems of implementations, but also gives a chance to make smaller micro-interventions with the community. Secondly, Istanbul has really striking topography, varied topography, and it's provide with many view spots to Istanbul. Even Istanbul is very densely developed. Still, you can feel the sun, the wind within the densely developed areas, within the quarters. But also, it's consequence in the nature hazard. So, beautiful designed areas, and as well like the Ayamama River. There are flood zones and the landslides, and they are already occupied by the development. And for today, we know that calculate it's for all Istanbul, so 3 300,000 people living in the flood zones in different parts of the Istanbul. You may see, I want to hear this is important. It always mentioned and planned accordingly. So the general structure, like the footprint, the double footprint and the natural footprint of Istanbul. So in the northern side there is a green areas like forest and the agricultural areas. On the southern parts, almost fully developed. But still we have those rivers. Ayamama is one of them that can provide a connection with the northern nature and the southern developed areas. Another very important the hazard risk of Istanbul is the earthquake. So these tiny grids are coming from the risk assessment of earthquake loss. It's based on a night scenario, the worst scenario, but you can see that here is the Ayamama and the most risky areas, like in terms of building collapse and loss of people, and as well the seriously wounded people. Because of these poorly designed buildings and very dense population, as all the are concentrated around Ayamama, this part, these quarters and these districts are in the high risk of the earthquake occur. After it, as Batuhan also mentioned, I'm coming from the Istanbul planning agency, so I have to present what we are doing there. So starting from 2010, the urban part of Istanbul is changed after the third year. And the new government or the new mayor constituency try to push a new vision and new tools for the planning of Istanbul. Mostly we are mainly focusing on the participatory planning and activate the engagement of other municipalities and also communities, and implement some new policies like the capture land value, new types of social housing stocks and some new social infrastructures. And as well the green infrastructure, as also your chair mentioned that the most popular and widely implemented strategies, those value of life, is one of them is Ayamama. And another one, Istanbul Planning Agency. It's founded last year as a semi-autonomous think tank of Istanbul. We are carrying multiple workshops for any kind of problems or problem areas or priority areas of Istanbul. So if any problem occurs around, we try to implement directly and combine or collaborate all the stakeholders from the community as well and also from governmental sides. So mainly the planning agency make the moderation and facilitation, the co-thinking, like define the problem and try to reflect the potentials for the problem, initiate the talk and interaction, people, community, and the governmental authorities, and then the mediate and disseminate the discussion, includes the data, the expertise, or stakeholders and experiences from another countries, also another institutions. And as last time, co-produce the policy, it's our aim, co-producing the policy options and project, co-produce the policies, options, projects, actions, and commitment of the community and the other authorities. So lastly, I finalize and coming to Ayamama. I totally agree with that. It's especially for the airport. It's a mislocated, you can say it's a mislocated opportunity for us. So these numbers shows the green areas per person for the district. So you may see here the 12 square meters per person green provision is split in the southern district, while only 1 square meter or 2 square meter green spaces provided on the northern districts. As well, these parts are, as shown before, in the earthquake risky areas. And if I transpose this the footprint of the airport to this highly dense zone of highly dense of Istanbul, 500,000 people live there. So how big opportunity is this zone compared to size? So it's maybe a mislocated opportunity for you. And like concluding remarks, so we may try to develop the policy responding to granularity in terms of the implementation as well, and a design that responding to the topography of Istanbul include also hazards and some innovations. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this quick and comprehensive presentation. This is our last presentation that I'm going to try to make. After we talk with Jude and Oliver and with you, we try to make some kind of conclusion about all this process. So I just try to make some kind of themes that maybe how can we go further about this issue or something. So I'm going to present these issues. Maybe how can we take action in the further about this watershed urbanism issue around Istanbul. For these themes, I listed some kind of thematic words, but maybe we can, after this whole process, we can make these thematic words work on together and revise again. So this first thing is about experiences, second one is about scale, third one is about model, and fourth one is spatial development framework, fifth one is co-production, and sixth one is design approach, impact, and dialogue. So I'm going to try to explain what I was thinking about this. So, but before everyone talk about their institution, so I just wanted to give a little bit information about what is urban co is. So, because we tried to act very quickly and we didn't able to know each other nowadays. So, I worked for first I started work for a foundation. I worked for private companies. I worked for public sector. And at the end of this whole experience, and there are lots of people like me who has great experience about urbanism, not just urbanism in sociology, anthropology, but there are some community workers for this urban issue. So we initiated a cooperative. It's an actual cooperative. It's not a private company. It's a non-profit company. We try to create some kind of a collective network of independent urbanists, like me, like Edwin, or like Ekman. So we wanted to create some kind of an institutional support for them to, create their ideas. This is our aim, and one of our aim was to, bring together from different, sectors. And today we are very happy that I don't know what is a very micro symposium, but there are some people from academy, and we are social enterprise. There are students, and Mr. Volkan is here from Dar Group, and we are very, very grateful for him, to supporting all these things. And there is this private sector, and then we think in that way, if we can continue about this collaboration from different backgrounds and different sectors. Actually, the mayor just came here and he just sent hi. But this is a very good scenario that in a micro scale, with voluntarily with this, if we do this in a very professional way, I'm sure that this gonna help solve our, concrete and emerging urban solutions in Turkey. So we are just a social enterprise trying to do this, bring together. From where it didn't start, I just wanted to emphasize this issue. So we have experiences. Turkey is not a country that has no experiences about urbanism or other related issues. But you know, I didn't mention this. I don't want to make a double thing, but actually we had three different important areas in urbanism of Istanbul. So this was the 15th period and 18th period where we created some kind of gece konus, or you know, we tried to the people tried to solve their housing problems illegally. Then after that we have this period of, you know, liberal urbanism and some laws that you know, try to create some regulations, and you know, but you know, they legalized it and they put more dense buildings on it. So this kind of this three-dimensional urbanism structure of Istanbul is a very important aspect of it. So we cannot say, we cannot think unless we understand these historical dimensions of Istanbul. So what this picture tells us, we did lots of research about it, in especially regeneration areas. In Turkey, every people wants to earn money from land. This is the issue. So every people thinks that their land is some kind of economical dimension. So it's not a housing issue, it's not about livelihood, it's a thought, it's a habit that we cannot, you know, change about Turkish people. It's not, it's based on lots of problems, but the first thing is we should try to change this belief that housing or having green space is a daily need, it's a need of life, not an economical gain. So, we did this map, I think 3 years ago. So this is the map of transformation, regeneration areas in Istanbul. So what we didn't talk today is, you know, these areas are, you know, how can I say, mentioned by central government. So when how can I say, red areas are, how can I say, this transformation of risky areas. And we have these reservation areas, that we have this problem for this mega canal project. So when you put all these risky areas, they are not on the rivers. They are on the places that they want to, you know, gain more economical, you know, profits. So when we talk about risk, the central government perspective or the governmental perspective is not the perspective that we are talking about here. So we also need to change this perspective. This is a risk issue, and risk issue is based on scientific decisions. So this is not about profit. So when we look at this, all these red areas, urban transformation areas, they are all the areas that people will have profit or something. So this is also a very important issue that we have to take action, I think, and also this huge canal, mega Istanbul canal project. So the other issue that we should work on, I think, is the scale. I'm not the best GIS user, but I try to you know, put all these river flows, all these networks, it's like vein in our body. So think about Istanbul in that way, and this is crazy. I think this is crazy. So what we have to think about is that this is there is this basin, there are corridors, there are rivers network systems. So we should find solutions and this kind of design solutions maybe on basin basis or maybe in geography basis. So this is, you know, every corner of Istanbul has some kind of a river flow or you know, freshwater flow. So this map shows this. It's very important. A couple of years ago, we, this competition projects. We participated on a competition project on renewable gas, and this is a scheme from that project. And we are talking about Istanbul, but we work for Anatolian cities and other basin areas. near there is Ergene Basin, and it's full of problems. And there are lots of basins in Marmara region, in lots of sides of Anatolian Turkey. So, right, there are cities that river flows, and all these river flows are having the same problems, like Istanbul and pollution or this thing. So, when we think about scale issue, we should think about more. Maybe we also need to think about more regional context. Also, it's very important. If we can find a solution, as we talked in break, for one of them, a good solution, it will the snowball effect should be implemented all other cities. It's not only the problem for Istanbul or this other thing. So this map shows the Ergene Basin and their some kind of the other rivers. And we talk about this TDR model. Actually, in 2013, actually even was also in our project team, we also tried to put, not in an academical way, but we also tried to put how can we implement this TDR model. We also believe that this model is a good model, and this is not a new model. Lots of countries are implementing this model. But this TDR model is very, very hard, and there are lots of sub-dimensions about this TDR model. When we work on that model, there are 10 important things that should be, so one of them is how people gonna make their application, how gonna municipality work on that project, what is the role of ministry, how we gonna give the people the information, how we gonna document this all, public process, this bureaucracy process. And there are the districts, and there are lots of districts in Istanbul. How gonna be transferred from one district to district? So it's very complicated issue, this TDR process. And size is also very important. From what capacity are you gonna transfer to what capacity area is also very important. And as the bonus, as I told you about this historical issue, Turkish people want bonuses from when they implement new projects. So they need new land rights. They want more land rights than their actual position. So bonus is a very important aspect of this TDR process. And this certification issue, how can we make this certifications official? So there is no law based on these issues. So, and the last one is about the banks. How can they, create these monetary issues, the credits, or this? These all the 10 things that we created, we talked about a couple of years ago. So the TDR process is actually itself is a very important, concept to take action. And the other one is about this spatial planning framework. So we have also planning, levels. So we need to also somehow make this cohesion between these implementing plans to DDR processes. So how gonna be, make this cohesion between implementation plans, çevre düzeni plans, I cannot, the environmental plans, so this is also very important work to do in the future. And we also think, talk about this urban design approaches from, MIT or other institutions like Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality. So maybe we can also go further for this participatory design actions in the future as a further study area. When we were working for this neighborhood, I think we were working about this neighborhood for almost 10 years. The people just in this neighborhood, you cannot create any 1 square meter green space because it's a historical neighborhood. You cannot demolish and destroy. So everyone wanted to reach the Kubalı Creek. So in this all the system that we created in the green area system for this neighborhood to make them to easily access to Kubalı area. So and we did lots of participatory processes in that neighborhood, and there are lots of experiences based on this neighborhood, and I'm really encouraging you to also check that Yademani experience. In that Yademani experience, we created some interfaces to create participatory processes. So this TAC Urban Lab is based on this Yademani process, because we wanted to regenerate this neighborhood, but we wanted to make it in a participatory method. So we initiated TAC, we initiated community houses, we initiated art spaces, we initiated placemaking actions to gather some participatory data from this neighborhood. So maybe this kind of actions from neighborhoods or different areas from Turkey could be implemented in this watershed urbanism processes too. And the other one is, this is an example from one of our projects in Balıkesir, Havran. We made an urban design guidelines to a city, a very small city, who wants to become a slow city. And we also proposed some kind of a green corridor, but as we talked before, there is this green corridor but we cannot touch. So it's very, this is a flooding zone, we cannot do anything. We cannot do anything that the human made. So to regenerate these places, we also proposed some kind of a new public interfaces to near that corridor. In Havran, we proposed agriculture innovation center project to create awareness about that green corridor, or to regenerate that green corridor. So this participatory and co-productive way of public places is a very important tool to take an action in the future. So I talk about TAC here. This is an urban lab which based on 3 things: design, participation, and research. So it was an old cinema building. It used to be an old cinema building, and this place renovated parallel to Yademani Regeneration project, and it helped this neighborhood a lot. So maybe we could think about some kind of these interfaces in our project. We did lots of works. We did placemaking projects. We did voting processes, public art processes. These lots of actions and lots of public programs took place in time. So I also want to give some credit to this place also. And actually, when I saw this presentations of the students, I love them. And this is another implementation that we did last year. It was parallel to Istanbul design we had, and we worked with Lebanese architecture firm called Bits of Atoms. And it was called Revolution Stove, and during this revolution in Lebanese, people like our basic protest, one of an architecture firm created a stove to gather people and to create some kind of heat and going on resilience again. So I think we need to not to think just in a very big scale, but we also need to think some kind of micro actions to create some kind of a sense in that kind of river flows. During this implementation, I don't know. I think I reached at least 50 people from this was installation in Perşembe Pazarı district. Homeless people, street vendors. municipality workers and this illegal parking people, we involved lots of people, and we learned that they wanted to destroy this thing, this public artwork. But when you told them and make them a part of the project, they started to tell us that no, this is our school. So I think we should think about more, how can I say, sahiplendirme, I don't know the English word, but it's very important aspect to do it. So how gonna be ownership our projects in that way, it's very important. So I wanted to give credit to this work too. All the thing, and this is also all concludes to one very important keyword that I'm very interested in. It's called co-production, and the co-production means there is this public institutions and there is us. Public has two-way meanings. I'm public, but also institutions are public. If we try to erase these distinct borders between public and public institutions and try to work together, this is what co-production is. So I think we need more co-productive processes to create more resilient waterfronts, and this is also a very important aspect to work for further in the future. So this is some kind of experiments that we try to do in category. How can we make these co-productive processes? In fact, is one example. There's this category academy. They wanted to create these institutional relations with the academy. There is this idea called working place that we did, I think, 4 years ago, and it's some kind of another interface that works with the entrepreneurs. So we should think about this. How can we create some co-productive processes through this process? For all these experiences that we created, it was one of my published works that tried to create some kind of co-production model with public. But there are three important aspects of this. That in the center there are these figurations, these society and societal networks, and this is very it's very hard to analyze this. Sociologists also they don't understand that there are lots of, but there are center there are these figurations, and if we create some kind of networks, public spaces and public programs around these figurations with public support, I think we can achieve more than we did right now. So it's not about designing a spatial problem. So after designing, you need to make programs. How can these places sustain themselves? So there are some keywords that I want: co-production, diversity, interaction, innovation, sharing, learning, and solidarity. These are very important keywords to fill this model with how can we produce. I'm not gonna say. And the last thing that I want to put some emphasis to work for future. Everything that we do has impact. So we don't assess the impacts of the projects we do, but we don't assess their impact. So I think assessing the impacts of the projects before, during, and after is very important. So it's a very important issue that we also need to work on. I think this is some kind of an example we did in kentsel strategy for Perşembe Pazarı historical district. They also want to renovate their public spaces, but all these public spaces are near to the some kind of local shops, historical bazaar areas. People are working in the bazaar areas, and when you regenerate these public places, it has this impact. So it's very important that we should work on how can we analyze our design projects' impact on their people's lives. So it's very important. So I showed this picture to the students when I was trying to make a presentation for Professor Lucian's class. This is a project that we did a couple of years ago. This is a project called Living Room Project. There is this regeneration, urban transformation area in Kadıköy, and we wanted to try to create some kind of a collaboration and gather some data from the urban transformation project area. Because when the buildings are empty, the buildings start to literally take place because there are lots of uncertainties still going on there. So even putting some two chairs, and it's not a big thing to gather data. Just putting two chairs and try to talk and try to create empathies. I think it's the first thing that we need to start from. And I think we should go on this kind of thematic errands and urban talks and creating some kind of a bilateral dialogue between us. So it's very important to continue this. So thank you. Arkadaşlar çok aceleyiz. Çok acele bir program yapmıştık. Sizleri yani böyle hızlıca böyle toplanmaya davet ediyorum.
Thank you very much.